Welcome to the Innovation Today podcast, where we speak with today's technology leaders about how they're innovating to stay ahead of changing industry dynamics and reaching new levels of productivity and automation. Brought to you by ServiceNow, your partner in digital transformation.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today on another episode of the Innovation Today podcast. I'm your host, Spencer B. Miller. I hail from the innovation office here at ServiceNow. And today we're excited to welcome Sumeet Kaul, a senior manager at Deloitte. Sumeet, welcome.
Thanks, Spencer. Great to be here with you. I'm really excited. This is a topic that is near and dear to me. So I'm excited to at least provide my perspective on the things of supplier risk and supplier management within supply chains. So thank you for having me on.
Of course. Beautiful to have you. Yeah, and you hit on it already. So we're going to be diving into supplier lifecycle management. We'll be hitting on supplier management, supplier risk, supply chain efficiencies, and all the issues, and hopefully maybe some of the not issues or potential improvements that we could see that we're seeing out there in supply chain in general. So with that in mind, Sumeet, what's your general lay of the land, and then maybe a little bit about your role on how this lay of the land has affected you and the customers and the people that you interact with on a regular basis?
Sure. So when you think about supplier risk and supplier management, this capability has been around for a really long time across industries, right? So as long as companies buy products and goods from suppliers, you've always had a function that works directly with suppliers, makes sure that you have assurance of supply or the ability to procure products without any disruption. I think what has changed more recently is there's a need for rethinking when it comes to the way you interact and manage your suppliers. And the reason is everything around us, right? We had an unprecedented production disruption because of COVID, and we still tend to get every now and then you keep hearing there is some of the other country that's going through some sort of a partial lockdown. Now that was never heard of before, right? We've never seen disruptions at that scale. There's also geopolitical issues happening across the world with the Russia-Ukraine crisis right now, tensions in Taiwan and China. So what's really happening is there's just so much turmoil in the world that the traditional way of thinking that I'm just going to work with my direct suppliers, I'll tell them, what we need, I'll give them feedback on how they're performing, is no longer sort of viable to drive resiliency in your value chain. And what we're seeing is a lot of leading companies are investing in capabilities to drive more insights into their value chain, right? So truly understand how deep their value chains are, how vulnerable their value chains are, what geographies are they super concentrated in, and try to drive mitigation early on, right? I mean, that to me is like fundamentally rethinking supply chain management and supplier management quite often. So I think that to me is like that fundamental shift that's happening that we're seeing across industries.
Yeah, that's such a huge point. Creating these areas of resiliency in the value chain as they support their customers. So understanding, if something breaks over here, what are the 2 to 3 things that I can do immediately to remediate that issue? Whether that's backload a new supplier, whether that's pull the supply from a backlog that I have in an existing warehouse, or some type of plan around it, right? Rather than just, I don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully that never happens, and just let it be, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a ripple effect that you need to sort of account for. And I think, Spencer, sorry to interject, but the one thing that really comes to mind, I give this example to a lot of companies, is think of yourself as a manufacturer, and if there's a tier 3, which is 3 layers away from your operations, if there's a fire or a shutdown for whatever reason in a manufacturing facility, the traditional way would have been to wait on a tier 2 supplier to get impacted, then a tier 1 supplier, and then eventually you would get to know about it in a few weeks or months, and then it's all firefighting, pushing product around across the board. But imagine if you somehow had the ability to know exactly when the fire happened, that, hey, this is something, it's within my network and there's been a shutdown, so let me go investigate potential impacts on my operations, right? I mean, that to me is a game changer, because now you've bought yourself precious days, weeks, or months to come up with a mitigation action. And the ideal, it's like the unsung hero. The ideal result is nobody ever knew about this disruption at all, right? I mean, that's like the win-win situation across the board.
Yeah, yeah, that you're so well versed for it that it is basically a non-conversation. It doesn't even end up in any CEO's dashboard of saying, "Oh, this is something
Exactly.
that's front and center." That, hey, we're in the news, or the fire is hitting this specific area that's near our manufacturing plant. That's going to be a big issue. Versus having a plan that is adjusted and able to be acted upon prior or as that event is happening.
Absolutely.
Now, so that's super helpful for setting the stage of the industry. I'd like to actually just hear a little bit more about your experience in this realm, Samit, and what got you interested in the environment of supply chain, how your career has actually led you to being able to have all this good knowledge.
So I have been with Deloitte for about 11 years now, and I've primarily worked in their supply chain and network operations practice. My forte, or where I operate, uh, really is in the smart manufacturing and smart factory spaces, where we help our clients across industries, improve operations, whatever clients are trying to do, right? Whether it is driving velocity within the networks or reducing costs, or adding new dimensions to their products, right? Like when it's new product development, new markets, etc. So that's where that's quote unquote my bread and butter. That's what I really operate in. I get excited about, and I've been really fortunate to have a great set of clients in that space. However, what happened is, as COVID hit all of us, right? Like, I mean, we talk about black swan events in supply chain and things that you never knew about. I think COVID is the mother of all black swans. I mean, there's never been a disruption at that magnitude across the board, and a lot of my clients started asking the question about supply resiliency and like what do we do about events like this? How can I get better in terms of my operations and my procurement functions, and not have to constantly be like go from one firefighting episode to another. And we at Deloitte, kept hearing this across industry. So we started putting our, decades and decades of expertise understanding these value chains together. And we've built what we call as our methodology in driving resiliency. And we've actually deployed this across clients. I think there are two aspects to, what we preach, quote unquote. One is there's always the tool technology component in any solution, but then there's also the culture or the process of how do you deal with such a situation, right? Like when we talk about proactive risk management, you're talking about a paradigm shift in the way you're approaching supplier risk and supplier risk management, right? It's no longer the traditional, I'm going to do a quarterly business review, there's a bunch of analytics, and that's it. You've got to be more proactive. So you're trying to like search for risk, you're trying to understand vulnerability. So there's a very big human component in there. There is workflow orchestration and a bunch of other things. So as we started helping quite a few of our companies, and what that has turned into is now I have so many of these discussions from cross industry leaders that it's been super fun. And what I really like about it is it takes core supply chain knowledge and capabilities and applies onto a situation which is so real for a lot of these companies, right? Like the supply shortage is not an episodic one-time thing. People are like a lot of companies are facing this across categories. So the applicability has been very real as well. So that's what has kept us going, and we continue to sort of help our clients out.
Yeah, that's so huge. There's two aspects of it that I love that you pull it out of that. I mean, me working for a software company, I also realize that software is not going to solve all the customers' problems, right? The culture aspect is huge on how the company responds to these events, and I think I mean, as part of what's happened over the past couple of years, it's just shined a microscope on, well, a lot of us just weren't ready for it, or we just didn't really have a good plan around it. I'm curious to something you hit on there on yes, you have over a decade worth of experience in this, and you work across multiple different types of industries and verticals. Was there an industry out there that was a little bit better set up for the black swan events that have happened over the past couple of years, or was it all kind of up with a juggling basket up in the air from all industries having to kind of react as quick as possible?
No, there's definitely some industries that have reacted much better than some of the others. For example, automotive, right? Automotive is always really looked at. They've got a lot of clarity and visibility beyond their tier ones, right? So the immediate suppliers. So by nature and by culture, they were always curious and they had these relationships. It still hit them pretty hard, as you can tell. If you go to a car lot today, try to get a car of your spec and your requirements, the
Good luck.
answer is probably going to be no, right? You're going to be on like a wait list forever. So clearly, it hasn't completely, helped them solve these problems. However, I think the concepts of being proactive, looking at beyond your existing, tier one suppliers, thinking about the multi-tiered nature of the value chain, those concepts are not foreign to anyone in automotive, right? Like they all have lived it. I think the extent of the disruption and not just one commodity, but like semiconductors, resins, and then you got like copper shortage during the German floods, and you had issues when it comes to the. You remember the freeze that happened
Oh yeah,
in Texas, right?
that's
Like
where I
all
live.
of
I
these.
remember it well. Yeah.
So all of those things sort of, it was just the impact. It was like a double whammy on already tight sort of supply bases, right? So automotive did really do a lot of work around it. There's manufacturers in general. In general, what we have seen is across industries there is inherent knowledge on certain value streams. So there are certain commodities that have always caused you issues. So you've always seen that there is like this knowledge residing somewhere in the companies where, oh, this particular value chain, I know the tier two, I know the tier three. But I think, Spencer, the biggest change has been to think of it more structurally, right? Like think of it as way of doing business. Thinking of it as, hey, this is not a one-time special project that I've been given responsibility for, but I'm going to proactively keep like monitor and look at my extended value chain, keep monitoring risk, identify risk, and start working through it. That has been something that is like net new across the board. I have one of my clients. It's actually great because I've seen the maturity over the last year grow so much that I need. Initially, we would talk about, hey, you need to illuminate your value chain, which means you need to understand what your buy sell relationships are. Then you need to identify vulnerabilities, and then you need to start monitoring them. That was so tough to sort of relate to before, but now I can see my client actually coaching and talking to other people within the organization and explaining the importance of proactive risk management. So I think, you know, it's not quite the Titanic to steer, but it's a big cultural shift, right? When it comes to decades of procurement practices. But I'm seeing the changes in the clients that I serve, and I think in general, from an industry standpoint, it's the right next step, right, from a supplier risk management perspective.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm even. I mean, I'm a bit curious on the probe down a level deeper on that. How do you get that first level of inception into the company to say, let's start to look at your vulnerabilities to allow you to understand the landscape of where you're at right now, and then then there's an iterative process to create a plan around what happens if a disaster occurs. What's your recommendation on that initiation of starting to shift the culture for some of the customers and potential partners out there listening?
So, Spencer, quite honestly and straightforwardly, I think everybody is suffering from some sort of disruption, right? I don't think there's any industry out there that today doesn't have at least one or two commodities that are in short supply or under allocation, right? So the issue or the quote unquote burning platform is in front of everyone, right? So where am I getting hit the most? Um, I think when clients reach out to us, there's always a desperation, right? Like they've been struggling with a certain issue for a really long time, and they're like, hey guys, can you help us solve this issue? And usually, the burning platform, as it already exists, we tend to take that as the impetus to drive this new way of thinking, right? from a reactive procurement organization to being more proactive. But if you're one of the lucky people listening in today, and there are no disruptions in your value chain, I would actually start off by taking a step back and really looking at your existing supply base, right? Like think about all the commodities, all the parts, all the geographies and suppliers that you interact with. Are there issues or gaps where, something that keeps you awake at night? Like, hey, I do not have enough inventory. I just have, it's all single source parts, too few suppliers, not really a robust value chain, too many logistics disruptions, etc. To me, those are those trigger points to start the investigation and proactive mitigation, right? The moment I know there's a problem that I need to mitigate, now I can really make use of advanced analytics. I can use big data. I can use like workflow orchestration to proactively sense, the exposure to these risks and then drive mitigation action against it, right? And to get started, the good news, Spencer, is the data and all the critical components are with all manufacturers, right? You know who's supplying to you. You know what product you're buying from them. You know how many suppliers are providing that product to you. You know how much you spend with these suppliers. That is good enough with you to sort of add, market research to say, where's my exposure, right? Like what areas of the value chain will really drive the highest amount of risk, and you start mitigating that first.
Yeah, yeah. It's having the data at the forefront of your purview to then have that conversation with your internal teams, of course, but even maybe exposing that with the supplier that you work with, saying, hey, this is where we saw some opportunities for growth. As the blip in the radar occurred from the Black Swan event, how can we avoid that going forward? How can we actually build a business continuity plan around if something like that occurs again? This is the type of relationship and interaction we want versus having delays for months and months and months to wait for a product to come on site.
Absolutely, absolutely, Spencer. And I think you brought up a really good point that I kind of mentioned, but I didn't really emphasize on it. Is traditionally, supplier management, quote unquote, always felt like you're trying to beat down on your suppliers for better performance, better price, etc. This proactive risk management is more a collaboration, right? You're trying to share intelligence beyond your tier ones, and I think it really, and I've seen this at the clients that I serve, it really drives and makes the bond stronger between a manufacturer and its suppliers, because the idea here is you're trying to make sure that you're sending the right signals out to your supply base, and it's almost a cautionary note, right? Like, hey, if we're sensing X, Y, and Z, just be aware of it. But all this is just a cautionary sort of note, right? Like let's collectively work in mitigating that strategy versus just having a one-sided relationship with suppliers, right? Like, I do feel that actually drives a lot of collaboration between multiple tiers within your value chain.
Yeah. The data and transparency just opens up for that conversation to be had, rather than it just be like a negotiation tactic for trying
exactly.
to
Exactly.
Yeah. What's in general what's so we understand a little bit on the vulnerability and understanding the lay of the land. You've hit on a couple key points on where we can start to initiate a change in the culture. What's kind of like a good next step for once you've established an understanding of the lay of the land, an understanding around the vulnerabilities out there? What's the next thing that you might suggest the customer to do on taking a step on? Okay, here's how I want to be more proactive and agile as an organization. Is there a general best practice there, or a general prescriptive notion, or does it completely depend upon the client that you're engaging with?
Well, I think there are some fundamental, structural things that is common across all industries and clients. And then I think the mitigation is what differs by industry, because certain things that you would take to mitigate risk in life sciences and healthcare would be different from an automotive supplier. However, I think I sort of mentioned this before, but when we think about, I'm calling it reimagining supplier risk and supplier management. that needs a different sort of muscle memory altogether, right? So you need to build that muscle memory within your organization. What we have seen across industries is there's usually a separate team that gets created. It doesn't have to be a massive team, but there's always a separate organization that gets created with the mission statement of being, for driving proactive supplier risk management and driving this capability within the organization. The idea is, you know, you are trying to get fresh eyes and a fresh perspective on supplier management and the risk associated with suppliers as well. So what I would recommend is, as you think about your own organizations, uh, first is the data piece, right? Like, take a step back, look at where your vulnerabilities are with the data that you already have. Um, then I think, in parallel, get started on whether you want to call it a tiger team or a separate organization that is solely responsible for driving this proactive capability within your company. And then I think the next step is, once you know where your vulnerabilities are, the step one when it comes to like going live with this capability is the illumination, right? It's the multi-tier illumination and the buy-sell relationships that impact your supply chains, and then risk monitoring on top of it. I think if you can set that structure out, what it does is it A, tells you as a company where you feel the highest risk is. B, it drives a little bit of visibility around, how deep your value chain is, what are critical nodes in the value chain that you need to monitor. And C, you're proactively now already monitoring these things. So if there is any kind of disruption in those nodes, this tiger team or whatever this team is called will already start working on some of those issues, right? You're not disrupting operations as it stands. There is no impact on existing firefighting, but you're building institutional knowledge and enterprise knowledge around these risks and mitigating any of the risks before they can manifest, right? So, like, that's the typical sort of recipe to get started. And then, once you have a certain sort of history and capability developed, then the sky is the limit, right? You can go super aggressive and scale up pretty quickly, or you want to continue with that tiger team and just look at specific issues. They can parachute in, fix certain things, and move on. It all depends on how you want to operate it across the board. And then, but the overall goal is, and I keep telling this to my clients, is the goal would be for procurement to move from day-to-day firefighting to more strategic decisions every day, right? Like right now, if I look at least in the industrial products, automotive, equipment manufacturing industries, I think buyers are spending probably 80% of their days fighting fires, right? Making sure parts are coming in, working with suppliers, etc.
Yeah.
We want to get to a point where that is minimal and on an exception basis, and your tools, capabilities, your structure from a process standpoint is, identifying these disruptions early enough that they don't need to become firefighting efforts of the future, right? So you're spending more time on supplier development, strategic sourcing, getting your processes better, and really doing more exciting stuff than firefighting, quite honestly, right? So that's the vision that I usually tell my clients about when we get started on this journey.
Yeah, that's almost nirvana, right?
Right, exactly.
I'm actually curious there too on if is there somebody that you've worked with, you don't have to name names, or an example that you can think of top of mind that has done that successfully. So has taken what we can do in the software world of automation on maybe alleviating some of the more firefighting tactics that typically get thrown onto a human or a group of humans right now, and somebody that's done it well in an automation standpoint that says, okay, we see that this is a problem that is taking us multiple weeks, multiple months, because humans are passing this around all different types of manufacturing hats, if you will. Let's apply an RPA bot to this, for example, or a robotic process optimization, or let's apply a machine learning tactic to say, here's all the historical data that our operational technology has published into us to then show us this is how we've operated in the past. We can make better decisions about it going forward. If there's a story or anything in there that rings top of mind for you, I'd love to hear it.
So Spencer, what I would say is that if you ask me, is there one that does all of it? I think the answer is probably no. But there are aspects of it that have been deployed across industries, right? I was talking about automotive. There are quite a few of our clients that are doing some phenomenal work on, just getting deeper into some of the the value streams or the commodities that have been an issue in the automotive world for a really long time, right?
Yeah.
So we've actually, we're working with some of our clients where we're really getting into the details. We're getting down to like tier four, tier seven, tier eight, tier nine level visibility into the value chains, and then not only just the analysis part of it, because that to me is just one part of the equation, but it's what do you do when you find an issue, right? I think that's where RPAs or workflow orchestrations or doing something, rebalancing your inventory, issuing out automatic POs or supply orders to move inventory within your value chain. All of those things tend to happen. I think the because this is such a new thing and it's gained steam significantly after COVID, that I don't think there's one company that's like the lighthouse or the benchmark on doing everything right. But I do believe there are certain capabilities that work really well in certain industries, like visibility in, like I said, in automotive is extremely great. Is it
Yeah.
perfect? No, but it's getting there slowly, right? Whereas I see traditional manufacturers, their focus is on specific commodity and specific value streams and getting very detailed and deep into those value streams to really identify risk. Then there are certain other manufacturers who are very specific and focused on geopolitical and geographic risk, right? So they want to understand how exposed am I to East Asia, right? And what part of my supply chain either ends there or interacts with that location, and if there is any disruption, what would be my liability, so to speak, from a risk standpoint, right? So there's different aspects of it. But what you're bringing up, Spencer, is an important point, because when we think about proactive risk management, speed is of the essence. First movers have the advantage.
Of course.
For
Yeah.
example, right, semiconductor shortage that we're still sort of dealing with. It's been almost 2 years. It started off in early 2020, and it's like picked up steam in 21. I think it's getting better, but you don't see that translated into, at least in the automotive sector, in the car lots yet, right, from an inventory standpoint. So it's still here to stay with us. But the first mover advantage in semiconductors is very clear. What we've seen is whether it is automotive OEMs or other manufacturers, they started directly negotiating with chip manufacturers and foundries and started buying capacity, right? So some of these chip manufacturers are tier four or tier five when it comes to value chain. This is something that wasn't imagined before, but now you're seeing OEMs do that. Now the thing is, if you are the 10th person, in front of them versus the first person, right? The negotiation tactic, the kind of leverage that you can get with these manufacturers is different. So the reason why we keep, at least I keep talking about proactiveness is because the goal is to be the first or the second person in their doors, right? So that you can have the upper hand in terms of negotiation and mitigation strategy. To me, RPA, automation, data, workflow orchestration, and just making faster decisions just makes you faster in identifying any kind of disruption and driving the mitigation as early as you possibly can, in the hopes of being the first person to start, to negotiate, whether it's a capacity agreement, buying more inventory, or whatever the case may be, right? I think the first mover advantage is what I think all manufacturers should aim for.
That's huge. Yeah. And almost a competitive differentiator, right? If you're in there,
Absolutely.
if you're in there with a good RPA understanding, or you have the ability to apply automation to certain parts of proactive device management, for instance, that's huge, and that provides you a leg up and probably gets you in the door sooner to have that negotiation as the first or second supplier in engaged in that account. Actually, this stems kind of what I'd like to almost bring us closing to, because you've already started to hit on it, which I think you just have a good visionary mindset, Samit. What are in general some key trends that you're seeing out there? You've hit on a few of them, and I think what I'd like to maybe ask you, given your expertise, is where do you see this going? Where would your nirvana idealistic state be 3, 5, 10 years out of what a solid manufacturing and supply chain relationship could look like?
Well, I hope we don't have a podcast in a year where you question on all the stuff that I say on this podcast and
I
how much
won't
of it
necessarily hold you
has materialized. But if I as I think about the market and the trends and just the top line indicators that I see, as I said before, supply market definitely is easing up. I see the trends when it comes to inventory levels or just the freight cost for ocean shipments between East Asia, Europe, and East Asia and North America. Those numbers are going down. Overall availability of products and shortages have started to come down. But then there's also the dreaded R word that's coming up as well, right? Like people are talking about slowdowns, etc. What, in my perspective, what we are seeing is definitely the supply market and supply chains are stabilizing. We do not see any improvements or major improvements when it comes to domestic challenges, right? Immediately, as in, we still have a shortage of truck drivers within the U.S. that's causing a lot of strain in, the logistics environment. It is easing up because as demand goes down, requirements go down, but the demand is still not down compared to like pre-pandemic levels, right? So you're still seeing a significant demand. What I tell my clients and customers on is, disruptions will keep changing shape, right? You have the Russia-Ukraine issue that caused a different kind of disruption when it comes to utility costs in Europe and some major commodities that were impacted. I hope this doesn't happen, but if there are flaring tensions between, China, Taiwan, and the U.S., there's a significant amount of supply chain that resides in that critical area that could see some impact, right? The worst case would be there could be some kind of stoppage, right? So we just need to be aware, and that's where when I talk about you need to realize what your vulnerabilities are. To me, if in 2023, what I would recommend is take a step back and just try to understand, how risk averse is your value chain truly. You may from a tier one standpoint think that, oh, all my tier ones are great. I do not buy any commodity or part that, all of these geopolitical issues or disruptions are sort of dealing with. I don't really have to do anything with it. But if you peel the onion one layer below, like your tier twos and then tier threes, you'll quickly see that we are a very globalized world. Everything is interconnected. Things are moving across the geographies. You tend to use ocean freight. You're using trucking. There's a lot of that interdependency. So, just getting more intelligent about where you stand from an exposure standpoint, and then starting to highlight and identify those top two or three different issues would be what I would say everybody should focus on. You do not need to like boil the ocean and look at every commodity, every part that you're buying. Just focus on the ones that will cause a significant impact on your operations, right? Something that will shut your line down, something that will impact your revenue immediately, and it'll be a sizable impact. Just focus on those. Get more intelligent about it, and start thinking about how can I be more proactive, right? Like how can I work with my tier ones and be more proactive and do something when I identify a risk signal. How do I interact with my tier ones? Like, what do I tell them, right? Like, how do you share this information? You will see the reason why I bring this up is because that doesn't come naturally to people, right? Manufacturers and suppliers, there's a little bit of there's always a layer of secrecy between different layers because you don't want to expose too much because that there would be cost cutting requirements or hey I or a beat down when it comes to pricing, etc. I think just interacting with your suppliers more in a collaborative manner, you will see there'll be a big difference. They will try to actually tell you about disruptions beforehand and support you in the process. So I know that that's quite a bit. The the general theme is going forward, things seem to be easing up from a supply chain perspective, but there will be disruptions, right? I think that I can guarantee there'll be some disruption, whether temporary, whether short term, or whether longer term. There'll always be that. But if you as an organization can truly understand your vulnerabilities, it just makes you better at mitigating risk.
Amazing. That's super helpful to me. I greatly appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared with us today. And there's probably a ton more that we could continue on with. Is there any last minute or any areas that you'd like to steer the audience to learn more about what we're doing collaboratively and how Deloitte can help in the manufacturing chain?
Absolutely. Spencer, firstly, thank you again for this opportunity to connect with your audience. Hopefully, everybody got something of interest in my experience working with my clients. But at Deloitte, everything that I've said, this is what we do. We help our clients across industries, whether it's life sciences, healthcare, industrial products, automotive, or others, right? I mean, there's a different recipe for each, but the building blocks are very similar, right? So if there's any question, anything that we can help you out with, do feel free to reach out to us. I don't know the mechanism here, Spencer, but I'm sure your audience can find a way to get to you and eventually to us as well. But this conversation has been great. And the last piece I would say, Spencer, just to add on is, ServiceNow and Deloitte, are bringing in a lot of cutting edge products and technologies to the marketplace specifically to address many of these issues. So if there are any questions on how we can collectively help you, solve your problems, please feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Yep. Thanks so much, Sumeet. And actually, I was going to hit on a few on our end too. So we'll definitely be able to get the audience to you should there be any questions to learn more about how we're working collaboratively and solving some of these critical workforce issues in manufacturing. You can actually give ServiceNow a visit at servicenow.com/manufacturing. There's some great stuff that's out there on store.servicenow.com, and you can actually search manufacturing and or Deloitte and filter based on the product offerings that you guys have already built on there, which are some killer ones. And there's a community group that's dedicated to supply chain and manufacturing. So if you go to community.servicenow.com, you can interact with, yes, ServiceNow people, yes, Deloitte people, but also customers and suppliers and partners out there that are in the similar vein or similar realms and similar industries that you're in. So go ahead and visit any of those items to get a hold of us. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and share. Sumeet, thank you again so much for your time. Look forward to meeting with you in the next couple of years and see if your vision actually comes to fruition. Thank you, sir.